Hey guys, it's Ms. Johnson here, and I'm here to bring you our notes video on the last learning target of Chapter 5, talking about the quadratic formula. This is also the last method that we're going to learn to solve quadratic equations. So far we've solved by graphing, we've solved by factoring, we've solved by completing the square, and today we're going to talk about solving using the quadratic formula. The example up at the top of your page says competitors in the 10-meter platform diving competition jump upward and outward before diving into the pool. The height of the diver in meters above the pool after t seconds can be approximated by the equation h equals negative 4.9 t squared plus 3t plus 10. How many seconds did it take for the diver to hit the pool? So we're looking at a parabola here. We've got a parabola that looks like this. The diver's going to jump off the platform, jump down and land into the pool. And we want to figure out where does she hit the x-axis, or in other words, the surface of the water. So we have to solve this. We have to solve the quadratic. Okay. Now, if we think about the ways we know to solve, one way that we know to solve is by factoring. If we look at this, could we factor it? Taking negative 40.9 times 10 would give us negative 49, and we would have a product or a sum of 3. There are no two factors that give us a product of negative 49 and a sum of 3. So factoring is out. Then, could we solve by graphing? We could probably solve it by graphing, especially if we use it on our calculator, but we are given this messy quadratic with this negative 4.9. So we use another method. Instead of using graphing or factoring or completing the square, we use another method. So instead, we are going to solve using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is the formula that looks like this. It says x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And there's a clever little song that we can sing in class tomorrow to help us remember the quadratic formula. But this is the formula that we're going to be using. Now, it looks messy and it looks like there's a lot in it, but the thing about the quadratic formula is that it works every single time. It will always work for us. Okay, so we can always use the quadratic formula. That can be the only method you ever use. It's not always the easiest, which is why we know how to graph or factor or complete the square, but we can always use it. Now, here's the thing about the quadratic formula. This little piece that's underneath the radical sign, this piece right here, the b squared minus 4ac, that b squared minus 4ac is called the discriminant. And what happens is there's 3 different possibilities. We've all seen that there's 3 different possibilities of solutions. Here we'd have 2, here we'd have 1, there we have none. And the discriminant will tell us that. So if we figure out the discriminant, we're going to know how many solutions we have before we even solve it. If the discriminant is positive, meaning greater than 0, that means that we have 2 real solutions. If the discriminant is equal to 0, that means that we have 1 real solution. And it's when the discriminant is less than 0 or negative that we get 2 complex solutions. Those are the ones that are going to have those i's involved. Okay, with I. And the reason that happens is because we'd put a negative number underneath the radical. And we've all learned now that when you have a negative under the radical, you end up with an I in your solution. So here's some examples of just what they might look like. If you have the square root of 50, that's going to have 2 real solutions because 50 is positive. That means your 50 is your discriminant and it's positive. If you have the square root of 0, then you have 1 real solution. And the square root of negative 20 is going to give us 2 complex solutions. We're going to have an I in there, and that's all because of that negative right there. So let's do an example. In number 1, it says solve using the quadratic formula. So we have x squared minus 12x is equal to 28. Well, first thing foremost, we have to have this equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 28 from both sides. So I get x squared minus 12x minus 28 is equal to 0. Then I want to go ahead and plug this into the quadratic formula. Here's my quadratic formula, and I'm going to plug everything in. I know that A is 1, I know that B is negative 12, and C is negative 28. So let's take a look at what that looks like. You're going to have x is equal to, make yourself a long fraction bar. You've got opposite of B, that's positive 12, plus or minus the square root of, and you need a kind of a long radical sign there, negative 12 squared, and put that negative 12 in parentheses, minus 4 times A times C. So my A was 1, my C was negative 28. And all of that, the whole thing, not just the radical part. I see a lot of students just write the radical part as a fraction. It's the whole thing is divided by 2 times A, which is 1. And now I just go to work simplifying. So I'm going to start underneath the radical. I have x is equal to 12 plus or minus. Simplify under there. Negative 12 squared is 144. And then negative 4 times 1 times negative 28 is going to be 112. On the bottom, I can go ahead and take care of that. 2 times 1 is 2. Keep simplifying. You have 12 plus or minus the square root of 144 plus 112, which is 256, all divided by 2. Now I have to actually take the square root. So I'm going to have x is equal to 12 plus or minus, the square root of 256 happens to be 16, all over 2. So 12 plus or minus 16 over 2. This is where we have to split it into two parts. We're going to end up with two solutions. Just as we do in most other quadratic equations, we have to split this into the two different solutions. One of them is going to be added, one is going to be subtracted. So from this, I have two choices. I have x is equal to 12 plus 16 over 2, and x is equal to 12 minus 16 over 2. The top one, 12 plus 16, gives me 28 over 2, which is equal to 14. And the bottom one, 12 minus 16, is negative 4 over 2, which is equal to negative 2. So those are my two solutions, negative 2 and 14. And that is the quadratic formula. We're going to go ahead and stop our video at this point. Thanks for watching, and go ahead and hop back to Schoology and take your quiz. Since you're out on YouTube, or if you get out to YouTube tonight, you can Google the quadratic formula or search the quadratic formula and find that cool song. We're going to sing it together tomorrow. Have a good night.